Hello and welcome to this video about authoring and leveraging Arazzo specifications for workflow mocking and testing. Let's say we're building a front end that talks to two services. In this case, to place an order, it first gets the location of the user and bases the location identifies the products available at that location and eventually places the order with those products. As you can notice, there is a sequence of calls happening here in a particular order to multiple backends across multiple operations. How do we go about building this application, especially if the backend is not yet available? Or maybe even if the backend is available, we do not want to depend on it so that we can isolate and build the front end independently. If you're familiar with Specmatic, you'd already say that we should just spin up a Specmatic mock. In this case, not just any mock, a Specmatic workflow mock, which consists of multiple mocks. In this case, it would be location service mock to emulate location service, and an order service mock to emulate the order service. And more importantly, to have a linkage between these mocks to make sure that they give coordinated responses to support the journey that is required by the front end. And as with any case, we always depend on an industry standard specification for any behavior. And for establishing the link between multiple mocks, we are using Arazzo API specification. So thereby, when the API calls come from the front end, the responses are coordinated to fully support the user's journey across the multiple steps. So let's see how we'll go about achieving this. So what I've done here is I have imported my project into Specmatic Studio, and I have the API specifications for location service as well as the order service available with me. And location service has the location endpoint and order service has a couple of endpoints, one for getting the products at a given location and another one to create an order itself. So let's put a workflow together using these operations. So I'm going to drag and drop the operations from here, and then let me link them up to create a workflow. This suggests to Specmatic in which order the steps are going to be called. And we'll give this a name. And we'll auto layout so we can make sure that everything is in the way we want it to be. And then hit generate workflow. And there you go. Specmatic has already figured out all the possible mechanisms and ways in which the application can behave for these three steps. So for example, get user details can either return a 2xx or a non-2xx response. Only if it's a 2xx would we go into the next step, and that would be the success criteria. And if the success criteria is not met, you can trace the line on the right-hand side. It goes all the way to the end, and there ends the journey. And likewise for subsequent steps also, Specmatic has identified the success criteria and what are the possible paths that can be taken in the journey of the user itself. So that leaves very little for us to do because Specmatic has done all the smart work that is required here. And now we just need to generate the Arazzo API specification itself from here. And we'll see that appear in our package explorer here. And there we go. So the Arazzo API specification in a fully accurate YAML format as per the specification standard has been generated by Specmatic. Now this is quite powerful because in comparison to other mechanisms of authoring the API specification, this is significantly easier and a lot more accurate way of doing it because we're doing it visually and we do not have to deal with the difficulties of authoring a YAML spec by hand. Even with assistance, that can sometimes become quite difficult, which is why we believe a visual reference is always better. And thereby, even after the API specification has been generated, we always have a visual aid on the left-hand side, which shows you what the possible paths are for the journey across this multiple steps. So with that, let's go back to the initial reason why we came here, right? We wanted to build a front end in isolation and we needed a workflow mock for that purpose. So let me quickly go to the mock tab and start a mock with this particular Arazzo API specification that we just generated. And the mock has already started. So now what I'm going to do is go to the application and start it off. The front end is running. Let me refresh the screen. And it's asking me for the email ID and the password of the user so that I can go fetch the location. That's the workflow, right? But what's the email ID and the password? Not to worry. When Specmatic generated the API specification, it also generated the data basis which the mock is going to work. So in this case, there are two possible journeys. one which is the happy path and the other one which is the not so happy path. So let's say let's take the happy path, which is the default journey. I'll take the Truman email ID. I'll paste it in here. And likewise, I'll take the password for Truman. I'll paste it here. And then I'll hit login. And as you can see, this is the happy path. So thereby the location was fetched. And also for that location, we have a product that is available and all of those have been identified and got back here. If you look at the mock tab itself, you will notice that these paths have been covered. The API call to get location 200 has been covered, and the API call to get products at the available location has been covered. So what is left is this journey where maybe there are no available products for the given location and what we should do next there. So for that, what I'm going to do is go to input and pick up the journey for the user where it's the not so happy path. There are no available products at that location. So let me log out and use this email ID and log in. And I do not have any products because this particular location does not have any information. So I'll go to mock. And as you can see, there are two calls now, and each of the calls has been figured out. That one call with the products which are available for Truman, you got products. And for the next email ID that we just sent for that location, we did not get anything. So that is the detail around what just happened with our mock. So now that we have the front end fully being able to run independent of the backend, we now need to focus on the backend itself. How do I test the backend? So before that, I'll stop the mock, and the mock has been stopped. This is the Arazzo API specification, and I need to switch gears to test. Now, what do I mean by test here? This is not just any test. This is an API workflow test, which means I'm going to be making calls across multiple services. So let me quickly go ahead and boot up my backend. I'll kill the front end, stop, and for the backend, I'm going to start off both my location service and my order service, and it started. So let me kill this. I do not need the front end. I just need the backend. And what I'm going to do is, before I run it, I need to say what are the inputs for the application itself, because earlier we had stub data that was generated by Specmatic, and that's what was being served back to us when the front end hit it. But when we are running an API test, the application would have something in the database, and we need to match our inputs to that database information, just like any other tool, so that we can make the appropriate API calls and get the responses. So what I'm going to do is quickly get the data for these two API calls. I'm going to get the email ID, Specmatic test, drop it in here. And then I'm going to get the details for the other user, which is the not so happy path. Paste it in here. And then I save it. So this will validate the input against the Arazzo API specification to make sure it's as per the schema. So now I can go back to the test and I simply run the test itself. And in the test, you will notice that it has already figured out it's 100% API workflow coverage. And I can go into the flowchart and see that there are, what is the path that was taken to cover the journey itself. So on the right-hand side, there is an ability to select the context. We are now currently in the default setup, which is the happy path. And as you can see, we get the user detail, get the products at that particular location, and this is the happy path. So we do get products. The array is not empty for that location, right? We do get products, and then we are placing the order, and it is successful. So this is one journey. And the other journey is this guy, where there are no products that are available for a given location. So in this case, as you can see, there was no products available. Thereby, we did not place the order and we ended the journey for that particular user. So both those paths have been traced. You can look at it visually, as well as you can go back and drill down into independent operations. What happened to the data is something that you can drill down to very last detail. So with that, the tests ran. But one question you may have is, we have two backend services. How did Specmatic even know which URL to hit and what server to hit? So the beauty of it is we did not have to give that information out explicitly, because that is already available to us in the API specification. So this is the location API spec. And if I go to the YAML setup, you can notice that in the service section, I have the URL for the location service. Likewise, for the order service, also, if I go to the server section, I have the URL, which is localhost 3000. So this is how Specmatic figured out where the services are running, and it ran the test and it gave you a full detailed output. So let's quickly recap. If we have a workflow that needs to be emulated or tested in the context of building a front end in isolation or building multiple backend services and testing them out respectively, we need a strong API standard that can help us. And Arazzo API specification is really helping us out there. That said, authoring an Arazzo API specification is quite important, and how that experience pans out is necessary that we pay a lot of attention to it, and thereby we have the visual way of authoring the API specification so that we are fully accurate in doing that. The second step is, once you have the Arazzo API specification, what can you do with it? And in true Specmatic style, you can both run a workflow mock and an API workflow test, which are both extremely powerful features. And with that, thank you for watching this video.